So I was thinking about the things I was going to bring this morning about great faith. And it pulled up in my mind what I had been hearing about CYC over in the Gatlinburg area. It's a challenge for youth conference. It's a lot of young people from all over the South, really all over the nation, coming together. It's one of the largest gatherings of young people that are worshiping God this morning. I know a lot of the people involved in that, and I know there's groups from Hebron and Morrison and Bobby Branch that went. And over in Ukraine, those that have the satellite connection are down. Christians had gathered down in each other's basements, and they're singing along with those young people at CYC for their worship. Isn't that just amazing to think that? There is great faith being shown by our brethren in Ukraine as they're being overrun by this Russian army. And so we need to keep all them in our prayers as well. I mentioned, I think Wednesday night, Mark Posey, who was caught over there. He made his way out to Warsaw, Poland, and he'll soon be back in Alabama early part of this week. He's got a lot of connections with the little churches that are over there in Ukraine, and knows a lot of the members. And he is trying to gather funds now that he can find ways to help them suffer through this tragedy. It's really a small world we live in now, isn't it, in our age? When I think about the Ukrainians, it wasn't many years ago I didn't know any difference in Ukraine and Russia. When I was growing up and to look on the maps when I was there, it was all the same. And then I've met some Ukrainians. I know some Ukrainian Christians that we worship with in Arkansas that met a little young man came from Ukraine, married one of the missionaries' daughters that was there. And not the place I would have expected to see great faith. But we're seeing great faith coming out of that area. And that leads right into this lesson. Where do you find great faith? And what does great faith mean? And we're going to see it, which at least for the disciples of Jesus, it's going to show up in a very unexpected place. Now, I've called this humble, persistent, Syrophoenician faith. Syrophoenician. Well, that's the way it is in the King James Version in the book of Mark. Syrophoenician faith. Let me show you who the Syrophoenicians were. You see that arrow off to the right. It's pointing there to the region of Phoenicia. And there was the cities of Tyre and Sidon. And in the ancient world, long before there was a Roman Empire, the Phoenicians were the mariners of the ancient Mediterranean. They would take their ships and travel afar and bring goods back, and that's how the things from the Mediterranean Sea found its way into the Fertile Crescent by these Phoenicians. And they established a colony in Carthage. Now that's the arrow off to the left. And so Carthage for a while was rival to Rome. The Carthaginian Phoenicians were different from the Syrophoenicians. They were Phoenicians, and Tyre and Sidon was their home country, but the Romans looked on the Carthaginian Phoenicians as someone to be kind of feared. Make sure you beware of them. And maybe that's why Mark was careful to make the people know this woman was of Syrophoenicia. That's over in the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, they were not Jews. That's the important point. In fact, we're going to see that she was a Greek by culture and a Syrophoenician by ethnicity. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it says that was her nation. The word nation there in the Greek language is the word for ethnos. It's an ethnicity that she was. And she had adopted the Greek culture. She didn't adopt the Hebrew culture. She was definitely not a Jew. And the disciples always being brought up for generations on. Now, we're God's chosen people, and had misunderstood the reason for which they had been chosen. They would not expected those disciples of Jesus to find great faith among this such a foreign, different culture that they had. Now, it says that Jesus, Mark chapter 7 and verse 24, and from thence he arose and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon. That doesn't say he went into the city itself. And let's look at another map. Get a little up close. If you can see Tyre and Sidon up near the top of that map, and there's a little highlight mark over those two cities. And if you can see it, I can see it from here. Maybe you can see it from there. It's in that region called Phoenicia. And it's right there by that yellow part. Later on, just a little bit southwest of that, let's say that'd be southeast of that, that would be Galilee. And Jesus preached throughout all Galilee, but here he's up on the border of Tyre and Sidon. Now that may be standing for that region of Phoenicia itself. It doesn't mean he was at the edge of the cities, but he was about to leave Galilee. And perhaps he even left Galilee and went across that border. And if that is the case, then this is the only time in the life of Christ that he left the ancient homeland of the Israelites, except for that time when he was a young child and was carried by his parents into Egypt. But you look, that's a very small piece of the world. Galilee and passing through Samaria and in northern Judea, and then just the other side of the Jordan, that was where Jesus spent his life. A man that traveled very little about this world and yet made such an impact over the whole world by who he was and what he did. So he's up in the borders of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and would have no man know it, but he could not be hid. You might remember the last couple of lessons we've had from the book of Mark. Jesus was being confronted by the scribes and Pharisees that had come up from Jerusalem. It was not a confrontation that he had invited, but he had entered right into it, and he pointed out their hypocrisies. Maybe now Jesus thought, I need to get away a little bit and rest a little bit. His timing had to be just right to accomplish what he does. And so he finds a retreat by going out to the borders of the ancient lands, and he enters a house, but you couldn't hide him. People were talking about Jesus, and word got out that he was there. A certain woman comes to him. And this is where it says in verse 26, the woman was a Greek. Now that's by culture. The Greek culture had spread all throughout the Mediterranean, and even the Romans that ruled the Mediterranean had adopted the Greek culture. And when we read about the Grecians in the book of Acts, a lot of times that is the Jews that had adopted the Greek culture instead of the Hebrew culture. And now this woman had adopted the Greek culture. She was a Greek by culture, but a Syrophoenician by nation. You can read ethnicity there, where it says nation. And so she was a foreigner to Israel, a foreigner to the Greeks, but was living like the Greeks would live. And there's something else about this woman. She has a young daughter that has an unclean spirit. These are called demons. These are called devils. And all we know about these unclean spirits and demons and devils is what the New Testament tells us. Now we learn from this that it was not a phenomenon that was limited to the Jews. Because here's a woman that is not a Jew, and her young daughter has this. And it is also not a phenomenon limited to the guilty. The word Mark used for daughter here is a diminished form of that word, which means this was a little girl. And so this woman has a little girl. She hasn't done anything to deserve this. And yet she has this unclean spirit. And this mother's love has heard that Jesus is at a house not far from where we are. And I'm going to go see Jesus and see if he can help me. And so she goes. It says she heard of him and came to his feet. I really want you to notice that she heard him. I'm going to bring that up several times in this lesson. She came to his feet showing reverence, and the word for worship means to bow down, and she's coming to the feet of Jesus in her humility, and she besought him that she would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. Now, I'm going to go over here and compare this. What Mark says about this and what Matthew says. And we'll kind of pull these two accounts together because both Matthew and Mark tell this story. Mark says she heard of him. Now, Matthew 15 and verse 22, notice what she says. Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou Son of David. That is quite a statement. From a Syrophoenician woman living like a Greek. But she had heard. She had heard about what the Jews hoped for in the coming of a Messiah that would be the Son of David. And what she had heard had convinced her that Jesus is that Son of David. That's significant in the book of Matthew, and Matthew's the one that points these words out. Matthew begins, Matthew 1:1, the generations of Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham. And this Phoenician woman, based on what she had heard, had gathered, pulled all this together, and come to that conclusion. Faith cometh by hearing. She had never met Jesus in person. She had never seen any of the mighty works that he had done. But she heard about them, and it all made sense. She knew the old Hebrew Scriptures somehow well enough to know that what she was hearing matched what those Jews were longing for. And while many of the Jews, even in Nazareth, had rejected him, what she heard, she decided, I'm going to go see him. This is the Son of David. He can help me. And that is a tremendous insight and knowledge that this woman had. What did she hear? She must have heard the things that we hear. When we hear from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have not met him in person, not in the flesh, and we have not seen those miracles, but we've heard about them. And we'll study our Bibles and see what the hope of Israel was, and then start hearing about what we read in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those things are written that we might believe. And we can put that together, and we can do what this Syrophoenician woman did. And we know we can go to him for help. Now watch at the conversation that ensues. It kind of startles us the way Jesus treated this woman. We're going to go to Matthew's account here just a minute because he brings up a part of the conversation Mark doesn't bring up, and we'll go back to Mark. But it's almost like, is Jesus being rude to her? And how do we explain this? Before we get into it, I want you to kind of keep this in mind. Jesus treated that woman the very way everyone would have expected a Jew to treat a Syrophoenician woman. It is as though he knows this is how my disciples would be treating her. I'm going to treat her that way. And I suggest he is doing this to teach them a lesson. Because they would treat this woman in this manner, and here he's going to be doing that, and the impression it makes on us is, how can Jesus be so hard on her? But that's what the disciples would have done, and what would have been expected. But then he's going to surprise them at the end. Watch this. It says that when she came, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil," he answered her not a word. You know, to be ignored is one of the biggest of insults, isn't it? And here she is pleading pitifully for help, and it looks like he's just going to ignore her. Now, one thing I want you to notice about this woman, she stays at this. She must have known that's probably how I'm going to be treated, but I'm not going to let that stop me from trying to help my daughter. So he says, his disciples came and besought him, saying, "Send her away, for she crieth after us." But he answered and said, "I've not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now understand, Jesus came to save the world. But when he was here on this earth, his mission was for those children of Abraham in the land of Israel. That's why he didn't travel out of that and go all over the world. He was focused on them while he's here in the flesh. And that's what he says. This Syrophoenician woman is not the reason I've come. I've come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. What's the woman do? Now watch this. She knows. She knew enough to know this is the Son of David. She may have expected that kind of response. But that wasn't why she's here. And what she says, she came and worshiped him saying, "Lord, help me." It's not about why you have come for Israel or why you have come for the world. My concern is my little daughter. I need help. You would think that'd be enough to break the heart of any man. But look what Jesus does. Go back to Mark 7 now, back in the account of Mark. And this is in Matthew 2, but we're going to focus on Mark. Jesus said to her, "Let the children first be filled. It's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs." That's not proper. We're not going to take what we prepared for our children and give that to the dogs. This is for the children. The dogs. Now the Jews called the Gentiles dogs. That's what they thought of them. And people have tried to diminish this, say, well, maybe he's talking about a little puppy dog or a lap dog, and maybe he was. But even then, dogs were unclean animals, and the Jews did not like dogs. They didn't have pet dogs. And so he's calling her and associating her with the dogs. And her answer, she answered and said, she didn't argue with him. She said, "Yes, Lord. Yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs." Doesn't your heart go out for that woman? She didn't come there to argue with him. She probably knew the way she would be put off. She'll be satisfied with just the crumbs. She had so humbled herself before Jesus because she knew we need help. And he said to her, I'm going to go from Mark to Matthew to Mark here. Pull the whole story together. He said to her, "For this saying, go thy way. The devil's gone out of thy daughter." For this saying. Look what she said. Look here, let's go back. The dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. We read about a faith as small as a grain of mustard seed can move mountains. And this woman would be satisfied with just some crumbs. If they'll help my daughter. He said, for this saying, go thy way, the devil's gone out of thy daughter. Matthew 15:28 tells us this that Mark didn't tell us. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, he adds this, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. I wonder what the disciples heard and how they received that. Because he had been out with them when they were in one of their little fishing boats in the midst of the storm. And they saw Jesus coming to them walking on the water. And when he got into that boat with them and calmed the storm, he said, O ye of little faith. But this woman has great faith. And think of all the disciples had seen, of all they had been there and seen his wonders and knew him, and yet they were fearful with their little faith. When this woman from a different city and a different culture had only heard and knew, if I can just get the crumbs. Great faith. For this saying, thy daughter is made whole. O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole that very hour. And then back to Mark 7 and verse 30. And when she was come to her house, she found the devil gone out, and her daughter laid upon the bed. Now, miracle. That daughter wasn't even present. It's one of those times when Jesus spoke the word and was able to take care of this at a distance. And that devil knew, I'm going to get out of this daughter because Jesus has said I must leave. And he left. And when that mother got home to her daughter, she found it everything just as he said. That's what we hear. That's what we hear so that we might believe. And if we see the faith that this woman had based on what she heard, and now we hear this, we need to have faith. These things were done and recorded that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. So, great faith. What does great faith look like? Well, here it is. Great faith, it comes by hearing. It comes by hearing. People say, well, if I could see a miracle. You don't have to see it. We've got it and we can read the accounts of it. They were written down not long after they were performed. And we can hear what she heard and we hear what she didn't hear. We've even heard that he rose from the dead. And there's account after account after account after account and witness after witness after witness after witness. And there's no evidence to the contrary. We've heard that. And we can believe. Faith cometh by hearing. Great faith is humble faith. She came bowing to him. She didn't come arguing with him. And she was willing to take the crumbs from the children that would have gone to the dogs. She came to Jesus in her humility. And great faith is persistent faith. Send her away. I'm not here for you. I'm not going to give the children's bread to the dogs. And every time she kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back. And I just can't but believe that the Lord treated her in this manner and let this delay and go on this way. Not because he's trying her faith. He knew she had great faith. But he wanted his disciples to see what great faith looked like. And now He's shown us. And we can be like that woman. From what we've heard, we can come with humility. And in all of the discouragements, all of the setbacks, all the discomforts, all the persecutions, all the things that would turn us aside, we can keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And the Lord will see that as great faith. So, Galatians 6:9 teaches, let us not be weary in well-doing. In due season we shall reap if we faint not. And she certainly did, and we can too. So how great is your faith? How great is your faith? You have heard. Are you listening? Have you tried to pull it all together? Not only have you heard, now can you humble yourself and prostrate yourself before our Savior? Bow down to Him and acknowledge His authority? And can you come and come and come? I extend this invitation every service, over and over and over, because it is my faith God works on your heart through His Word, and He'll reach you if you will humble yourself to Him. So I bid you come. Believe His Word. Turn from every other way. Confess His name before men. Be baptized into Christ. And live a life faithful to Him. Do you have that faith? If you do, then come as we stand and sing.